Well, thank you so much for staying with us. Earlier, we told you that today is April 2. What you may not know is that it's one of the days separated to observe certain things, one of which is the World Autism Awareness Day. It's observed on April 2 every year. And this year, the theme is Advancing Neurodiversity and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The whole idea is to raise awareness about autism and, all related issues around it. This morning, we're joined by Dr. Oluwatoni Adeyemi, who is a consultant public health physician and senior special assistant on health in Lagos State. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, tell us what people need to know generally about autism. Any condition that is related in the minutest way to disability gives people the shivers. Tell us what we need to know about autism.
Okay, so first of all, autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So what that basically means in simple terms is that it starts from the brain and then it affects the development of a child. But autism is not just present in children. Adults also have autism. So when there's this neurodevelopmental disorder, it affects the way the child communicates sometimes. It affects the behavior of the child. It also affects the social interaction of the child. So maybe how the child interacts with peers or how he interacts in an environment, maybe in a crowded environment, or how he's sensitive to noise, lights, and all that. So usually we don't look at autism in isolation. We look at it as a spectrum because it varies. There are different, in a layman terms, I could say that we have what we call mild autism, moderate autism, and then severe autism. So it varies, and it's not necessarily a disability because what it means is they have a different ability, which is why the theme this year is looking at neurodiversity. What that means in simple terms is that the brain has diverse ways of functioning. The brain has different ways it processes things. So these children fall on different spectrum of this autism, what we refer to as autism. And it would amaze you to know that the mild autism before used to be called Asperger's syndrome. And these are children that have very high IQ. So despite the fact that they have been labeled as having autism, they have a very high IQ, and then they channel their strengths into other things like maths, things like chess, things like creative art. So you find that those children are very good in some selective aspects of brain function generally. So this is, in a nutshell, is what autism is. But we have the severe one as well, and moderate.
So now, when you say it exists in adults as well, is this something they catch along the way or they had it from birth?
So most likely they would have had it from birth. So autism presents early enough in birth. How we usually detect or diagnose autism is when a child is not attaining the developmental milestones. So pediatricians they have developmental milestones, meaning what a child is supposed to do when the child is 1 year, what the child is supposed to do when he's 2 years old. So it usually starts from childhood and then advances into adulthood. Unfortunately, they usually say there is no cure. However, the child can still live a good quality of life based on enabling and supporting environments that have been put in place for that child and then adults eventually.
It's that supporting environment that I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that those who have to deal with it on a daily basis, you would understand their concerns as well, because they literally have to create a totally new environment, What are some of the challenges that parents and caregivers usually have with autistic?
Okay, so the challenges actually stem, first of all, even from the family unit, from the nuclear family unit. Because for autism, a lot of people tend to always go into denial initially when a child has been diagnosed with autism. And sometimes the mother might live in a bit of regret or think that it was probably something she did in pregnancy that led to her having an autistic child, all those are myths, which I hope we'll dispel later on. So there has to be acceptance, first of all, within the individual individual nuclear family units to know that, okay, this is a child with special needs. These are the strengths of this child. I always emphasize the strength part because these autistic children actually have strengths which should be harnessed. So it starts from that individual family unit. Then you now go a bit wider to the community. Community meaning schools, churches, and even healthcare facilities that these children go to. They need to understand the peculiar needs of these autistic children. And then initially there was a school of thought that was like those children should be in specialized school. But research has shown that having them in mainstream school actually helps them better. So the implication of this is that there should be policies, even in our educational sector, to ensure that we have special needs children in all our schools so that once they have been identified, their unique needs can be attended to and tailored to at these educational facilities or schools. Likewise, in healthcare facilities as well, because when they go to healthcare facilities, because I told you that it goes straight into adulthood, if they don't have a caregiver that is following them to the healthcare facility, the healthcare provider should be able to notice and identify that this is an autistic child or an autistic adult. So apart from, because a lot of them have issues with communicating what they are actually feeling. So you come up with innovative ideas, innovative things like have pictograms, have pictures that can help you. If you want to ask about their level of pain, there should be something pictorial, things that you know that they'll be able to respond to easily. So that's all part of building an inclusive environment to ensure that they are not left behind.
Now, I know that Malcolm wants to come in on this conversation, but please speak to those caregivers in particular, and that's what concerns me the most, because as you know, it's not just education they have to readjust.
Yeah.
They have to readjust their menu, they have to readjust their lifestyles and everything. And so what are the characteristics of a child that has been diagnosed with autism that the parents and caregivers need to understand and defer to? Because it can be tiring, you know, when you struggle with a particular, aspect of your life. What are the things that you would recommend that, look, you know what, we need to give this a little more attention?
So yes, as I described earlier, autism actually falls into a spectrum, and it's a very long spectrum, meaning each child with autism would not present the same way. So even if you have two children with autism, their characteristics would not be the same. So it's not a one-shoe-fits-all kind of situation. You have to understand. So the onus is now on the parent or the caregiver to understand the unique needs of this child so that you're able to cater to those unique needs. So they have varying, there are some, in fact, there are autistic children that are hypersensitive. So when they hear music or they see bright lights, it makes them very hyper. And on the other hand, you have those that are hyposensitive. So they are hearing music, they are hearing things, and they don't respond. They have a blunt affect, what we call a blunt affect, meaning they are not showing their emotions. There's another misconception. People usually think that autistic children have no emotions because they usually have a blunt affect, but they actually have emotions. So the summary of what I'm trying to say is that there's no one approach for autistic children. We do not put them together. Instead, we try to, that's why we say neurodiversity. They are divergent. They have different ways that their brains function. So as a caregiver, as a mother, as a father of an autistic child, you need to understand the specific needs of your child. So it's when you understand this need that you'll be able to tailor responses and tailor approaches that would help this child. So it's not even the specialist that would help you do that, because the specialist will give you assignment to go back home to understand how your child behaves. They can help you understand, though, but you have to be the observant one to know how your child behaves, and then this would help come up with strategies to be able to deal or handle with this child.
Just when you thought you were done with school, face another one.
Yes, totally.
Malwe?
Dr. Adeyemi, let me quickly, take you up on the myths which you're hoping to expatiate on. Some people were talking about how they think that vaccination and all those kinds of things sometimes, causes a baby to then become autistic. You want to speak to this? Because some people say it's based on research. How true is it?
Okay, so from evidence so far, that's a major myth that we're trying to dispel, which is linking vaccinations to autism. And this came about because autism is usually diagnosed when a child is around between 12 to 18 months of age. And this is around the time they have completed their first set of vaccinations. So mothers trying to find a reason for the autistic child will automatically link it to vaccination. But research has shown that there is no link at all between use of vaccines and the development of autism. However, there are known predisposing factors to autism. First of all, it's been linked to genetics. It's been found that there's a familial link, meaning it's sometimes run in the family. That's autism. So that's one of the associated factors to the development of autism. Then we also have environmental factors and biological factors. Some of those biological factors include advanced age, but this time around, you know, like in Down syndrome, it's usually said that a woman above the age of 35 years old that gets pregnant has a higher chance of having a child with Down syndrome. For autism, it's actually the man. So when you, a man above 40 years of age has a higher chance of giving sperms out that could lead to an autistic child. There are also some infections in pregnancy that could lead to autism. Infections like chlamydia in pregnancy, syphilis in pregnancy, and even gonorrhea in pregnancy. But these are things that are tested during the antenatal period. Exposure to toxins as well, air pollution when a woman is pregnant, and even some drugs that a pregnant woman could use, like drugs for epilepsy, can also predispose one to having autism. So vaccines, from all the research that have been done, have been proven not to be a causative factor for autism.
I see that you're also the Senior Special Assistant on Health to the Lagos State government. I was wondering, do you think that there is something that the Lagos State government can do, or governments in general can do, to raise awareness and also help parents who have to, you know, deal or study or, you know, help their children become regular adults?
Yes, totally. So we have an agency which is called the Lagos State Office for Disability Affairs, LASODA. So LASODA deals with disabilities of all kinds, all forms, even though initially I had said that autism typically would not refer to it as a disability because it just means that you have a different ability. But yes, that agency is responsible for advocacy to ensure people understand what autism is, how to deal and handle and cope with children with autism. So they do all that. So government is really big on that. And then because I said it's a spectrum, that we have the mild, moderate, and severe. For severe, they rely heavily on caregivers. They're almost able to do nothing on their own, which is why we also have the Ministry of Youth and Social Development in charge of some of our special homes in Lagos State. So we have some designated homes whereby if a parent feels I can't cope anymore, this is draining on my resources, it's draining on even my mental health and all that, sometimes government can actually admit and accept some of those children into our special homes where they are properly catered for and then their special needs are met. But remember that I said that the goal is to ensure that these children also go to mainstream schools. So what that means is that Lagos State would also be looking at equipping special needs teachers, having more special needs teachers in our government schools, so that once these children are identified in such schools, we don't have to pull them out of school. Instead, we integrate them into the educational system and ensure that whatever needs or whatever unique needs that this child requires, they are made available to them in our mainstream schools.
Tell us about this, the theme of this year, the World Autism Awareness Day 2025, advancing neurodiversity and the UN Development Goals. What does that mean, and what's the person watching and listening to you right now expected to do?
Okay, so advancing neurodiversity still brings us back to the definition of autism, which says that Autism just means that their brains are functioning at different levels and different capabilities. So what that means is that these children with autism have varying needs. And then we have the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals that we're working towards. So as we're working towards the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to ensure that we take into consideration the diverse functioning of the brain of these children. They need to be, we have to have inclusive policies. I mean, when we talk about things about education, which is one of the SDG goals we're aiming towards, everything I just mentioned about education, meaning having special needs teachers in our mainstream schools, should be considered, because we want to ensure that these children are not left behind, that these children are able to thrive wherever they are as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals.
You know, most of the time when we talk about children, we tend to restrict all of their concerns outside of the home. We tend to restrict all of their concerns to education.
Yeah.
But they definitely are more than that. Would you say that governments, society, are giving adequate attention to the needs of children on the entire spectrum, let me use your word, generally, as opposed to just keeping everything that concerns children to education?
Oh, so everything that concerns children is not limited to just education alone, because remember I said that these children with autism also have unique talents. I mentioned things like chess, I mentioned things like arts, which these children are very good in and which have to be developed in this child.
I get that about the autistic child, but I'm talking about children generally.
Oh, children generally.
Because even the other children who are not autistic or who don't have any special needs, they also have to interface with children with special needs. So how do we prepare them for all of that? What are the other talents and skills we need to teach them to, so that the inclusivity will be indeed inclusive?
Okay, so because we have changed the strategy now away from having specialized schools for these children, we encourage them to go to mainstream schools. So these other children are exposed to autistic children from a very early age. So schools, even from home, parents have to educate their children that different children have different abilities. Children are special in their various ways. Before, also in schools, they would designate just a classroom and say, this is the classroom for special needs children. This causes stigma and discrimination, and this is what we're trying to prevent against. So the goal is to ensure that they are integrated in whatever system they find themselves, whether in school, whether in religious organizations, the churches, the mosques. They are integrated, and other children are made to understand, because other children too have to care for these children with special needs. So they need to also understand their peculiarities. They need to understand some of the things that maybe they react to, so that they can also form like a shield around these children.
You sound like you're giving the teachers more work right now, because that's what they have to do. We have to wish you, you know, the best at what you do. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
Adeyemi is a consultant public health physician and senior special assistant on health in Lagos State. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.